Hello all my friends in Texas and across the South. Well, it's been a bit of an unusual week. There's been some snow over the Texas Panhandle and parts of Oklahoma. The western part of Texas has been pretty quiet. The east, there's been some moderate precipitation. I think overall it's going to be a fairly benign type period as we get through February into early March. There will be some modest precipitation, especially over eastern parts of the region. But it looks like the main story, the main action is going to be off to the east over the southeast U.S. I'm going to be talking about the weather pattern not just through February, but as we get into March in this week's edition of the Weekly Water Outlook. Feel free to email me anytime if you have any questions or would like things discussed in more detail on these outlooks. Stay tuned. Here's the precipitation that fell over the south, including Texas, over the last week. The area in green is anywhere from a half inch to an inch. The yellow is 2 inches, so the far eastern part of Texas received fairly decent rainfall. So we get up into the northern part of Texas and Oklahoma. It came in the form of both rain and snow. The pattern in the Texas Panhandle into western parts of Oklahoma, that area of green there, was the more significant snow. The water equivalent looks like it's a half inch or so, up to an inch. That was more about a half inch in that region. That was more significant. But then the western part, the southwest part of Texas, no rain whatsoever over the last week. If we look at percent of normal, you can see that very clearly. The area of rain, or the area of red, that was no precipitation at all, less than 25% of normal. And the area of blue in the Panhandle into parts of Oklahoma, above normal precipitation for the week. Now, we've had this trend for quite some time that southeast Oklahoma and eastern Texas has received more rain or snow, and that's climatologically based as well as meteorologically based. Over the more recent past, we have seen this trend of more enhanced precipitation, rain and snow over northern Texas into Oklahoma. That's been a fairly recent trend, more in February. Now, if we look at where the snow fell over the last week, you can see clearly the green there is 6 to 9 inches of snow, the green dots. The maroon is 0 to 3. That's the lighter amounts of snow. So the heavier snow was confined to the Texas Panhandle and western parts of the state of Oklahoma. No snow elsewhere in Texas, so about 90% of the state of Texas, no snow. Looks like about half of Oklahoma received snow, and it's just a very small part of Kansas. If we look at the snow cover on the ground from a national perspective, right now 37%, and last week was 41%. I'm a little bit surprised. I know we started the year very high, and the graph on the bottom shows that we started right around 60%. Ever since then, it's gradually been coming down. A little surprised. It looks like the same areas are getting more and more snow rather than expanding the snowpack this year, and that's why we can see even recently it's come down a bit. But if we look at Oklahoma, it appears that almost all that snow has melted. I see a little bit of shading of white in the far northwest part of the Panhandle. But for the most part, the snow that was on the ground earlier this week has melted by early this week. So here's the drought monitor. We can still see that the southern part of the plains into Texas is definitely leaning towards drought. Oklahoma and Kansas still remain a very large part of the states in D3, which would be extreme drought, and definitely pockets of D4, exceptional drought. Texas has been not quite as widespread, but you can still see the majority of the state is in some degree of drought, and we have these cores of D3 and even some small cores of D4. Sort of interesting, off to the east, you can see it's not too far off to the east that the drought pretty much ends, and there is flooding over parts of the southeast U.S., and I'm going to be talking in a minute. That area has been very active. So Oklahoma and Texas and Kansas has been on the edge of that band, and it doesn't look like it's going to be really getting into that active band, at least anytime soon. If we look at the changes over the 1 week and 4 week periods of the drought, generally areas of yellow are conditions getting worse. Areas of green are getting better. And you can see for the most part, even though there are a couple little areas of green, for the most part, the drought has slowly been getting a bit worse over the last 1 week and the 4 week period. As I mentioned, this time of year, it's not likely to change very significantly getting worse. It'll be slow changes. On the other hand, if there is precipitation, it can change for the better quicker. Now, the only teleconnection I want to talk about this week is the Arctic Oscillation. Arctic Oscillation has been changing from negative to positive fairly significantly over the winter months. That has caused significant changes in temperature, alternating contrasts in temperature. Right now we're running at a fairly steady, moderate negative, and it looks like for the most part it's going to stay like that. So typically what that might mean is that the pattern's not going to change quite as much as we've seen. There will be pockets of cooler or colder air. There will be pockets of warmer air, but they probably won't be alternating quite as much that we've seen earlier this season, at least as we get into the latter part of February. So this is the pattern that I expect as we round out the month of February in the next week or so. Typically, it looks like a trough of low pressure over the west into the central part of the nation, and then tendency towards that lifting over the east. And I've indicated here these little colored circles are energy pockets, and these will be rotating through the upper jet stream. Like we've seen over and over, and again, this is climatologically based, but it's also meteorologically based, that these pulses of energy as they eject out will generally be east of our region before they pick up the moisture. And the moisture will be picked up into the southeast U.S. along a boundary that'll be stationary here. So the precipitation will be more enhanced in this region and perhaps brushing the east, but really not much sign of moisture or much activity over central or west parts of our region. It looks like it's going to be off to the east. So this is the precipitation forecast for the next 7 days. You can see it looks actually very similar to the last week, where it does brush southeast Oklahoma and far eastern Texas. This is the type of pattern we had in January, but it really doesn't start kicking in more until it gets into parts of Arkansas and Louisiana, and then off to the east where it's much more significant. And if I look further out, this is the farthest out that the medium range models go, 384 hours out. This is early March. You can see really nothing that looks all that impressive to me, other than just some modest rainfall over the eastern part of Oklahoma, eastern part of Texas, and then the far northwest part of the state, more modest of Arkansas, more modest precipitation. And then that axis of heavier rain is generally off to the east. So really more of a status quo type pattern. This doesn't mean that there won't be rain or snow. There will be, but I think it's going to be at best modest. And the western parts of Texas, central and west, look like they're going to remain below normal precipitation right into early March. So the takeaway from today's briefing, looks like Oklahoma and Texas will be on the edge of the active area over the next week or so. There could be some modest precipitation, especially over the eastern parts. Over the west, though, it looks mainly dry with below normal precipitation. Hey, thank you for listening to this week's briefing. I will be updating this in another week. Thank you.